you know, just what it's doing with the biopic, right, which is the worst of all genres. It's based on a true story about a woman who cut off her lover's penis, and I think it's a film that everybody should see. Just the amount of beers that are drunk in this film will make you, it'll make you sick. I cannot say that I liked this film. I didn't.
Vidéo Club.
Welcome in one of the last video store in Paris. What is your relationship with the physical edition and with video store? Like,
I grew up with every Friday after school, I would go to the video store. When I lived in New Mexico, it was called Hastings, and I would spend 2 hours deciding what my movie would be, what my video would be. I've been collecting, well, at first it was VHS that I was collecting, but I've been collecting DVDs and then Blu-rays all my life, and I have way too many in storage now. But I keep compulsively buying Blu-rays, not only because I like to hold them, but with streaming, sometimes it's even more convenient just to pay than to go find the physical copy. If I love a film enough, I want to possess it. When I was a teenager, I really loved Takashi Miike, especially for how prolific he is. You know, he's just like a punk. And so Visitor Q was one of my favorites of his growing up. Especially just because it's so transgressive and so stupid and brilliant. And there are images here that have never left me, like the father who decides to have sex with a corpse one last time. Well, she was alive when he was first having sex with her, but she dies, he decides to go one more time, and then he gets stuck, and he can't get himself out, so he needs the help of his family to get him out of the dead body. That always stuck with me. This film is pretty unique. It's just one aberration after the next. It's a very, very perverse, kind of evil movie.
would you think it would be the best, I don't know, entry in this massive filmography of his?
Yeah, that or Ichi the Killer. Or, I mean, the ending of Dead or Alive maybe feels like the ultimate Miike statement. Although the first film I saw of his, and I think this was the case for a lot of people, was Audition. That's one of his best. But that feels like the ultimate Miike film, is Visitor Q. Empire of Passion by Nagisa Oshima. He's a fascinating filmmaker. He kind of began as Japan's Godard, very experimental, very polemical. His films were very political, and he was playing with form. I mean, the early films are almost non-narrative. There's one, The Man Who Left His Will on Film. That one is like pure experimentation, and I'm not even sure if it totally works, but it's brilliant. And then Death by Hanging is a really great satire. Then in the 70s, he moved more towards traditional narrative filmmaking, but it was through subversion that he got there. I mean, In the Realm of the Senses is a really, really, it's a very simple film. It's a love story, and it like functions as almost like as erotica, but it's moving towards, of course, an act of terrible violence. But it's so focused. It's really only about this sexual connection between a man and a geisha. That's a brilliant film, great film. And then he followed that up with this film, Empire of Passion, which is really wonderful, and it's one of the great ghost stories. And much like In the Realm of the Senses, it's obsessively focused on this sexual connection. And in that case, it's just as illicit, maybe even more so, because it's a married woman who's having an affair. They end up conspiring together to kill her husband. So it's kind of The Postman Always Rings Twice. And then it's about her, both of them being haunted by the ghost of the husband. Basically haunted to madness. There are just incredible images in this thing, and the atmosphere is so dense, and the music is so great. It's a very strange, alienating, kind of misanthropic film. Yeah, this and In the Realm of the Senses are a great double feature. Kwai-dan is one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen. Certainly one of the most beautiful color films ever made. It was made by Masaki Kobayashi, who is a pretty fascinating filmmaker. I think Harakiri is, for me, maybe the great revenge movie, and one of the great samurai films. And structurally, really, really, really playful and adventurous. It plays with flashback in a really wonderful way. Just as far as what it's doing with matte paintings and building environments on set, it's as far as anybody, I think, has gone with artifice. What it achieves in terms of the uncanny is really remarkable. And whenever I think about color, I come around to this. And there's an animated sequence in Beau is Afraid that plays with artifice and color and saturation. This was one of the first films that I thought of and talked about with Joaquin and Cristobal, the people who are doing the animation. Well, let's see. I guess I could talk about The River. So, Tsai Ming-liang is a really remarkable filmmaker. This is my favorite of his, The River. He's one of the great stylists, like contemporary stylists, and he's somebody who from the beginning has been playing with minimalism and kind of slowness to the point of stasis. As he's gone along, his films have only become more radical in their slowness. I saw it when I was a teenager, and it's about a man who is convinced to help a film crew out in the beginning of the film because they're trying to shoot, you know, a wide shot of a dead body floating in the river. I forget the name of the river, but it's filthy. And I think it's famously dirty. They have like a dummy that they've been using, but the dummy looks bad, and it's not. It just looks like a dummy. So they go up to this guy who they don't know, and they say, "Do you want to be in a movie? Come on, be in a movie. Just lie down, face down in the water, and pretend to be dead for one shot." So he does it. It's not even 30 seconds that he's in the water, and then he leaves, and the rest of the film kind of chronicles the deterioration of his health because he went into the water. Again, it's a very transgressive film, very beautiful film, very funny. The way that his health deteriorates over the course of the film strikes me as very profound.
Maybe we can go to the French section over there?
Great. Well, okay. Alain Resnais is a filmmaker that I really love. This film, My American Uncle.
Quelle merveille! Comment faites-vous ça?
C'est assez compliqué.
I think is one of his best films, one of his funniest films, and a film that somehow is able to be kind of both empathic and there's a lot of love for humanity, but there's also something really misanthropic and anti-human about this film, and I find it really fascinating in the way that it deconstructs human behavior and reduces people to really almost these like machines that could be, whose behavior can be predicted and anticipated. It's very a singular film. I don't know anything that does quite what this film does, so I love it. Especially the first 30 minutes are remarkable. I've talked about this film a lot, but I love Jacques Tati. I love Playtime. This was a film that was really on my mind with Beau is Afraid, especially as we were constructing all these worlds. And the first world in particular, which is sort of an urban world, there were a lot of background actors who I wanted to be very specific. And I was thinking about what Tati does with the frame, as far as, you know, how he populates the background, the midground, the foreground, and how, you know, a person who's far, far off in the distance will be, you know, what they're doing is just as important as anybody who's in the foreground. Just that philosophy where there is no background actor that does not deserve all the attention in the world. And so that's something I love about this film. So, Custody. This was a film that really impressed me, and Denis Ménochet is so frightening in it. And it made such an impression on me that I knew I wanted to work with him. I cast him in Beau is Afraid, and it was really because of this film. This is the film that made me want to work with him. He's very scary. He's the best. I love him. I loved working with him so much. This I just think is a film that's worth talking about because it doesn't get enough love. This is Clouzot's last film, because he didn't make The Inferno. This is one of the most beautiful color films. You know, it's a film about the art world, and the art is actually great that's on display here. That never happens. It's usually a mistake to make a film about the art world or about an artist, because then the film either neglects to show the art, or they do show the art and you wish that they didn't. But this is this is a really fascinating film, very beautiful, very funny, very misanthropic, you know, very Clouzot, but it's great. It's you know, it's probably obvious to talk about Bresson, but L'Argent especially strikes me as just one of the, you know, the perfect films. It's an adaptation of the Tolstoy story, The Forged Coupon, I believe, and so it's a torch-passing movie where money is passed from hand to hand, and you just follow the money through Parisian society, and of course the actors are models, right, and they're very blank. And it was his last film, and it strikes me as one of the most bitter final films. The way he handles violence in this film in general is very fascinating. And there's one shot where there's a woman who's carrying a teacup, and the camera follows the teacup in close-up, and then she stops to interact with her husband. We overhear the interaction, but we stay on the teacup, and then he hits her. It's just a little bit of tea that spills over the side of the cup, and then she keeps walking, but it's a really indelible image, and the violence is really, it hits hard. And that was his genius, knowing just how much you need to get an impression across. This film had an impact on me when I was younger. I saw this film in theaters with my mom, The 29 Palms by Bruno Dumont. I cannot say that I liked this film. I didn't. It reminded me of Zabriskie Point in a way that I don't necessarily mean as a compliment, but the ending is so upsetting and so shocking, and I think part of its power is that by the time it comes around, I was just enervated and kind of exhausted by the film, almost half paying attention. I had kind of given up on the film. And then in the last 15 minutes maybe, some things happen that are pretty traumatizing and upsetting and brilliant. I think again, this isn't praise, it's just, or condemnation. It's just, there's nothing like this film, so it's worth talking about. Okay, so Nicolas Ray is a great filmmaker. I know that he's very appreciated here in France. This film, Johnny Guitar.
Now one more.
I thank you kindly, mister, but I had enough.
I'll say when's enough.
Is one of my favorite films. A really fascinating melodrama. It's a Western, but it's a total deconstruction of the Western. It takes all the tropes of your traditional Western and flips them in the way that it uses color, in its approach to artifice, what it's doing with even just gender roles. I mean, Sterling Hayden is Johnny Guitar. He's the star of the title, but he's really basically a supporting actor in this film. And it's Joan Crawford and Mercedes McCambridge who really are at the heart of this film. And their feud is so fascinating and like passionate and Freudian. It's kind of this like lesbian tragic romance, and even what it's doing with sound. In the beginning of the film, when he first gets to this casino, there's a roulette table where a ball has been rolled on the roulette table, and it creates this sound. And it's this ambient sound that persists, and you forget about it, and it just creates this. It creates the atmosphere of the scene, and then and there's a tension that comes with it. It feels like 20 minutes in. It's probably not that long. Somebody stops the ball, and it's very jarring, and you're thrown into this silence, and it's brilliant and very ahead of its time. So great film, Great, great film. Hitchcock, hard to avoid him. There are a lot of films that I could talk about, but Marnie is, for me, one of his most fascinating films and one of his most Freudian films.
Marnie, wake up. Marnie?
It's a very, very funny, perverse character study about a woman who's frigid, who's a kleptomaniac. It all goes back to her mother. And the mother character is just this insane concoction. The artifice here is also self-conscious to the point of being Brechtian. There's a matte painting outside the mother's house that is so fake that it looks like a mistake, or that he's, slamming you over the head with the artifice, with the fact that this is a movie and it's not real. And that happens a lot. There's a horseback riding sequence where and it's rear projection, and it is so clearly not real. But, he made this film at the height of his powers, and I choose to believe that was a very conscious decision on his part, and I think a really fascinating and exciting one. I always think about how fake this movie is. And I love it. I love it.
Well, maybe we can go to the Anglo-Saxon section.
Okay, well, Wake in Fright is a pretty incredible film. It was made by Ted Kotcheff, who made First Blood, the Rambo film, and he also made Weekend at Bernie's. But don't let that dissuade you from watching Wake in Fright, which, in my opinion, is one of the great existential nightmare thrillers, and one of the funniest movies I've ever seen. I think probably the best film about Australia that I've ever seen. Just the amount of beers that are drunk in this film it'll make you sick. I should warn anybody who's going to watch the film that there's a kangaroo hunting scene that is very upsetting, because it does feature actual kangaroos being killed. But, if you can watch it, be outraged, but still, watch the rest. It is one of the great comedies about, hell being other people. Well, I'll talk about I'm Still Here. So, okay, I'm Still Here, directed by Casey Affleck and starring Joaquin Phoenix. And this is one of the films that made me want to work with Joaquin Phoenix more than any other. So, people might remember that Joaquin Phoenix retired in order to become a rapper.
This is my last act thing I'm doing. Retired, yeah.
And that it lasted for about a year, and that was for this film, which is a fake documentary about that time in his life. And it's not only one of the great comic performances, what Joaquin does here, and it's absolutely a performance in every sense. But to me, it's a kind of a heroic artistic gesture. He's taking his own name. I mean, even just the question of having an identity as an actor, and what does that mean? And are you even entitled to one? And what he does with his name is genuinely suicidal in this film. And so I love it. And when I saw this film, I knew I had to work with him. The Butcher Boy is pretty great. This is, for me, like the great Neil Jordan film, based on one of the great Irish novels by Patrick McCabe, about a 12-year-old psychopath. And it's so funny. The book is brilliant. The film, I think, captures what is so brilliant about the book. If I had to compare it to something else, it would probably be Clockwork Orange. Okay. In just how inventive the language is, and a kind of expressionism where the world of the film matches the fever of the character's mind. And it's really great. And it has one of the most amazing child performances I've ever seen. Really remarkable film.
Behind you, on your right, is the horror section.
I'm gonna stay away from it only because because my last two films were horror films.
Yeah.
I was asked so many times about horror films that I've talked about all my favorite ones. One film by Martin Scorsese that I think is remarkable that not enough people talk about, certainly not in the States, is Silence, which he made very recently.
This faith you have is so strong.
Based on the Endo book. Of all the films he's made about faith and what it means to have faith and what it means to be Christian, I think this is the most fraught, complicated, complete investigation into those questions that he's made. And I think it's one of the most powerful films he's ever made. There's an epilogue here that I think, as a gesture, is one of the most alienating things he's ever done, and one of the most touching things he's ever done, where once the priest apostatizes, which, you know, the whole film is essentially him refusing to do that. Once he does that, we are severed from him, and we shift to this epilogue where a Dutch tradesman narrates the rest of the film. The effect is very uncanny and disturbing and beautiful. The fact that the film becomes essentially a love story between Andrew Garfield's priest and Kichijiro, who at the beginning of the film he's disgusted by, is really incredible. And the way that it happens is incredible, and I think it's a film that everybody should see. I mean, I just talked about Mishima, I could talk about it again. On strictly a design level, it's like astonishing. It's one of the most beautiful films ever made. On a structural level, it is incredibly radical and clean. Architecturally, the film is remarkable. And then, you know, just what it's doing with the biopic, right, which is the worst of all genres. This strikes me as one of the most playful biopics ever made, and this alone gives that genre like a right to exist. I would say this and Topsy Turvy strike me as the great biopics about an artist. But I would say, just speaking of Mr. Turner and Topsy Turvy, those are remarkable films for also how they basically neglect the tropes of the biopic, or if it's not neglecting, it's how they consciously avoid them. In that there is no real like clear narrative structure. They're not telling stories. They're a succession of kind of perfect scenes whose main concern is to really investigate what it meant to live in that time, which I think is really the interest of a biopic. And if you go to those films expecting a story, then you likely will be disappointed. But if you go and give yourself to them, then I think they're among the most generous films about the art life ever made. I've talked about Roy Andersson before. There's nobody like Roy Andersson. He's very possibly the most singular artist working in film right now. And the way he works is pretty unique, and he innovated this new style that has a lot to do with Tati. It feels a lot like painting. It tends to be a static camera, and he'll build an environment for that, for that frame. And there are these beautifully timed, tragic, comic vignettes that look like nothing else, except for maybe painters. He made hundreds and hundreds of commercials, kind of perfecting the style before he finally came around to making this film in 2000, Songs from the Second Floor, which I think is one of the great films. It's an astonishment. It's pretty amazing. And from here, he's been kind of almost making the same film over and over again, but they're just perfect. They're treasures. And his last film, About Endlessness, are all masterpieces. Michael Haneke's first film, the first of his trilogy. I think he made the mistake of calling it the Emotional Glaciation Trilogy, but he's disowned that title. And this is a perfect film that follows a family on the same day, 3 different years. So it's 3 acts. The first 2 acts, it follows their rituals. Eating food, driving the kid to school, picking stuff up from a hardware store, going through a car wash. And so the first third is that, with very little speaking. The second third is that same day, 1 year later, same thing. And the last third, on the same day, the next year, destroying all of their possessions and killing themselves. And it's pretty amazing. I'll talk about Taxidermia by Georgi Palfi. It's a grotesque, surreal, kind of phantasmagoria. I think it's like widely reviled because it is very harsh, but it's also totally visionary. And on a strictly technical level, I think it's one of the great films of the 21st century. One last one. We've got to talk about La Casa Lobo, an animated film, stop motion, by Cristobal Leon and Joaquin Cosina. There is nothing like this film. It is one of the most frightening, visionary works of stop-motion animation I've ever seen. I was shocked when I saw it, and so delighted. And I left the theater completely buzzing. When I realized that I wanted to ostensibly do an animated sequence in Beau is Afraid. It's a scene where the main character enters a play. And at first I thought, okay, I'm gonna shoot this like it's part of the film. I realized I didn't have the resources for that. So then I thought, okay, he's entering a play, so he should be entering, you know, the aesthetics of a play. Like it should be stagecraft. And then I realized even that might be too hard to do without the help of animation. And so then I realized, well, if I'm gonna do that, I wanna work with people like this, so I better try them first. Not expecting them to do it because I know that they're artists who don't really work for hire. And that's what this would have been, since I was giving them a shot list and storyboards, and there were strictures around what we'd be doing together. But very happily, they said that they wanted to do it, and working with them was one of the great experiences of my young career, since I'm just starting still. But I love them. This is a permanent work of art.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Konbini! Am I doing this right? Is this how this show goes?
It is perfect.
Okay.